Start by I'm going to do a quick share here of the first Can You list that we're going to be looking at. If you've had a chance to look in Blackboard, you'll see this posted as well, but I thought I could just pull it up here. So this is what one of these Can You lists will look like, and this is the first one we're going to look at tonight. So, again, it's set up as sort of a series of questions, the idea being that hopefully in the end, you will be able to say yes to all of these items because you do know how to do these things. So we're going to start off with just some of the basic Scratch platform tasks like creating projects and naming projects and sharing projects. And then we're going to get into the programming. And what I like to do with Scratch is kind of start with the most concrete elements, which are the visual things that they call sprites. They are basically about drawing pictures. So I think that's something that everybody can grasp. So we'll start by talking about just the sprites and how they get made and how they're costumed and things like that. And then the second chunk that we're going to look at tonight has to do with coding, but just codes that have to do with changing the way that the sprite looks. So we'll start by manually creating the way a sprite looks, and then we will look at coding that will change the way a sprite looks through code. And then the final chunk we'll look at tonight has to do with events. And that starts to get into interactivity because then that gives us a set of tools where a user can do something to a sprite that will then make that sprite change its appearance. So we're going to kind of build it that way from the most concrete to kind of the most abstract in terms of programming. And then as we go through the following weeks, it'll kind of be the same thing. We're going to get into sort of more and more programming side of things, things that are they're sort of less visible on the screen as we go through the program. But it seems to be an approach that works pretty well. So this is where we're going to start. I'm going to switch over to not sharing this, but let me share a different screen. Boop, boop, boop. One thing that I will say, and this is, take this information as you will, in terms of web browsers, I personally am a Macintosh person, so I generally use Safari for everything. Scratch will run pretty well in just about every browser. It definitely seems to work the most securely in Chrome. I think when they designed it, they kind of used Chrome as the web browser that they were using. So in terms of their background coding, I've never had an issue with Scratch operating in Chrome. Occasionally, I've had students run into some weird little bugs that occur. And usually when we start trying to figure it out, it boils down to they were using a different browser, and usually moving to Chrome helps that. So I'm not saying you can't use other browsers, but if you discover some weird little issue where Scratch just doesn't seem to be operating the right way, maybe try, if you've got Chrome, try opening it up on Chrome and see if that fixes the problem or not. So just by way of kind of mentioning that. So the first things we're going to look at are just the basics of like creating projects and so on. So the screen that we're looking at right here, when you log into Scratch, you're going to see something similar. If you go under your name and you go to My Stuff, they like using sort of non-technical terminology in Scratch. So they just call it My Stuff. And that's where you will see any projects that you're working on, whether they're published or not. It will tell you whether a project has been shared, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. You can also unshare projects from here. So if you decide you don't want everyone else seeing something that you've put out there, you can always unshare it. Scratch also uses the idea of studios. And I guess the best way to explain a studio is to kind of think of it like a folder, but sort of like an active folder, a container for projects. So you can create multiple studios for yourself to help you organize projects. So if you're working on stuff on your own, you might create a studio where you're sharing that stuff. Other users can see studios. So the reason they call it a studio is kind of it's a portal where you can share a group of projects that other people can see. For the purposes of this class, we're going to have access to 4 studios that I've created, one for each of the 3 mini projects, and then one for the final Scratch project. So since we're sitting here, this is where you would add one of your completed projects to one of those studios. So if you're looking at your stuff, first of all, you'll need to have shared a project first. You can't put it in a studio until you've made it public through sharing. And I'll show you how to do that when we're inside a project. But when a project has been shared and you're here on My Stuff, you will see this little Add To button. And when you click on that, it will show you all of the studios that you have access to. And you simply click on the one where you want to add it, and it will add that project to that studio. So when you complete a mini project for me, the final step you'll do once you've finished it and shared it will be to add it to the studio for that mini project. And then that gives me kind of a one-stop shop where I can look at everybody's mini projects. Also, all of you will be able to see each other's projects too. So it's a great way to also kind of just see what other people came up with, if they solved problems in a different way than you did, and so on. So we will have access to those studios. So beyond that, adding a new project is pretty self-explanatory. They give you a button right at the top of the screen that says New Project. You click on that and it will just open up a new workspace. I've already created a project that I'm going to use for all of the work tonight. So I'm just going to open that. The last thing I'll say from this page is that each project will have 2 links here. If you click on just the name of the project, that will take you to sort of the public page. So that'll take you to a page where you can actually run the project. And we'll see there's a place there you can give instructions to the public about what your project does. You can give credit. If you've borrowed coding from other people, you can give credit to them there. So that's what happens when you click on the name. If you want to actually work on the project, then you click See Inside. And what that'll do is take you to the editor portion of the program. And that's where you can actually go in and add things. So I'm going to click on See Inside. And that's going to take me into the actual project editing page. So this is where you're going to get very familiar with this whole interface. It's pretty well laid out. Again, the people who designed this program were designing it for young children. So they tried to make everything sort of clean and very visual and very graphic and colorful. So it helps anyone who wants to use this program, kind of an example of universal design, and that it is pretty straightforward to see all the things that you can do. So in terms of what you're looking at on the typical screen, starting from left to right, on the left, you're going to see a series of colored dots, and those are categories of code blocks. So if you need to quickly get to something that you know is in, say, the variables category, you can just click on the variables and it will scroll the list right to the area where all of the variable blocks are. You don't have to click on those buttons. All of the blocks are here. They're just in one big long list. So sometimes it can take a while to get to the block that you want. So if you know what category it's in, these are just a way to get to the category really quickly. Each category is color-coded. All of the blocks within a category generally deal with the same type of programming. So it's a good way to kind of understand how they put the blocks together. The next area is obviously the blocks themselves, and they are designed as blocks that snap together much like Lego blocks would. Once they're snapped together, they will operate from the top down. So if you want to run a program, you click on the first block and then it will run through all of the blocks you've connected together in order to do whatever you've told it to do. So that's why the blocks have certain shapes. Those shapes are designed to show you how they click together. Some blocks we will see, they call them, I think, top hat blocks. You can't put anything above it. So they are designed to sort of start a program. And then you will see others that are just oval shapes. Those are ones that you can drag inside other blocks to provide information to that block. So those are what are called reporters. We're not even going to look at those tonight, so we don't have to worry about them yet, but just so you kind of know why some blocks are oval and other blocks are shaped differently. The space next to that is your main workspace. So if you're working on the code, this is where you will build the code. So if I want to add something, I drag it out into this space. It's now part of the code for this sprite. If I want to get rid of it, I drag it back out. If I'm working on the look of sprites, which they call costumes, if I'm in that tab, then this window becomes my graphics editor for me to create the sprites. We're not going to do much with sounds, but sprites can also have sounds attached to them. So there's a third tab, and that's where you would edit the sounds for a sprite. So depending on which tab you're on, this middle screen becomes your editing space. The top right-hand chunk is about, that's your preview. That's actually showing you what your program looks like. So you can actually test your coding out. If you click on a script, you will see the script running over here and you will see the results of it. So it's a nice way to be able to preview it without having to leave this page, go to the public page, check it out, come back, and so on. If you're working on a smaller screen, which I kind of am tonight because I'm broadcasting this, they do give you an option to go for a one where there's a smaller preview window and a larger workspace. So you might want to check that out. You can just flip back and forth between the two. Below the preview window is the sprite, the sprite window. So all of the sprites that you're using in a project will show up down here. This is where you add new sprites. This is where you set sort of the basics about a sprite. They will all show up here. And then finally, this last little corner down here is for backdrops, which are special sprites which only display the full size of the screen and they're in the background. So they generally don't do anything. They just provide the background look for your program. So all of your backdrops will be contained over there. So that's just kind of the basic overview. Beyond that, in terms of things that you're going to do, you can rename projects easily by just clicking on the title at the top of the screen. Whoops, didn't mean to do that. And typing in a new name. It's as simple as that. Once you've typed in the new name, that's the name for the project. The share button. So when you're ready for a project to be seen publicly, all you have to do is click on this orange share button. And at that point, it doesn't mean that the project can't be worked on, but it does mean at that point that anybody out there in the Scratch world could potentially look at your project. So generally you hold off on that until a project is more or less functional and ready to go. And I showed you how in your My Stuff page, if you've shared a project and you want to unshare it, you do that from the My Stuff page. Unfortunately, you can't unshare from here. I wish if I click on this and say share, it is now a shared project. I can't click on that button again and just say unshare it. For some reason, it would be nice if it did, but it doesn't. And the project page, that's the other page I was talking about. This is what the public would see. So you can give them instructions, you can give credits. This is where they would actually run the program and so on. They can provide comments. You can also add it to a studio from this page. This is another way that you can do that. Also, I want to point out, I'm going to be asking each of you to share your mini projects with me in Blackboard. All you're going to be sharing is the URL for your project. The URL you're going to grab is going to be this one here. Don't give me the link if you're in the editor. Don't copy that link and give it to me, because then what it's going to do is the same as if I'm remixing your project. It's going to open up a new project for me that has your code in it, but I'm not going to be able to provide comments or anything. So you want to make sure that you're sharing the link that is for the program page, for the public page on it. All right. So let me go back inside this. I think that is everything. Let me just quickly check here. Create a project, we did that. Name a project, we did that. Sharing a project, we did that. Oh, the last thing is just saving. Piece of cake, you can go up to File and Save Now. Scratch will autosave. Scratch will autosave. So if you forget to save, it's not the end of the world, but it's always good to get in the habit of saving often. And you can also, if for some reason you want to download a copy of the program to your computer, you can do that from there as well. But that would only be if you're trying to move a program from, one Scratch environment to another or something like that. So anyways, all right. So that's all of the basic layout of the program and the basic sort of file functions. Any questions so far? All right. Then we are going to jump right in and talk next about sprites and backdrops, but we'll start with sprites. So as I've said, in Scratch terminology, a sprite is just a visual thing, a drawing, an image, a character, an object. And the way this program works is through manipulating sprites. So you can't just have code that's sitting out there. All of the code has to be connected to a sprite. So once you've created the sprite, then you would be giving it instructions for what you want it to do in the program and so on. So everything starts with sprites. So let's start with the most basic thing, which is you just want to add a new sprite or create a new sprite. In the bottom of the sprite browser, there is a little, by the way, this is the Scratch Cat. They just call him Scratch Cat. He's sort of their logo. So every project you open will have him in there as a sprite to start with. You can delete him if you want to, if you're not going to use it, but that's why it shows up there. But in any case, when you go down to this and say to choose a sprite, you've got 4 options to pick from. One of them is uploading. You will probably not be doing that because we're not going to be creating sprites in external graphics programs. But if you get into Scratch that far, you can actually create sprites in other programs like Photoshop or Illustrator or things like that, and you can bring those in. So if you want to get more involved with the graphics side of things, maybe you want to use an external graphics program. So you can actually bring an image into this program from the outside. Next one is surprise. And it's exactly what it says. It will randomly pick a sprite from the entire catalog of sprites that are available through Scratch. I've never used that myself, but if you truly don't care and you just need to get something in there, try surprise and see what it generates. The next one is paint. That is when you want to create a sprite from scratch inside Scratch. It has a somewhat limited graphics editor, so you can actually draw things from scratch and create sprites from scratch. So that is what you would choose for that. The final one is choose a sprite, and this is where you have access to Scratch's full library of sprites. So if I click on that, Let me zoom back out here. Sorry, I'm zooming in and out so that hopefully things are a little more visible. You will see that they provide you with a library of, I don't know, several hundred sprites of all different types. There's a couple of alphabets in there. There's the numbers in a couple of different styles. And then there's objects, animals, people, kind of a whole range of basic images that you might want to use. And they are all available for you to use. There's no copyright or anything on these. They are available for you to use as you want. They do categorize them a bit. So if you're looking for just food, you can click on food. And the other thing I'll point out is some of these sprites are animated. So as you're drifting over them, if they move, then it means that sprite has several different costumes that you can move between. So you can actually kind of animate it. So like this food truck has 3 different costumes for 3 different types of food on it. The milk jug, can't tell what it's doing there. It looks like the milk jug is doing jumping jacks or something like that. I'm not quite sure. The muffin gets a bite taken out of it. So just be aware, some of them are just static images. Other ones, they've built several versions. I know a lot of the animals actually will animate. They'll fly, they'll walk, they'll do various things. So if you find something that you like, let's see, I'm kind of in a dog mood tonight, so I'm going to pick dog 2 here. And just by clicking on it, now I have a second sprite here called dog. And I've got the original cat sprite as well. So if the sprite is something that is just in the library already, easiest thing to do, find it, click on it. It is now part of your program. If you don't like it, you can always click on the trash can. It will go away. In fact, I'm going to get rid of the scratch cat for now. And now we have our lovely dog here on the screen. Okay. With each sprite, there are some basic settings that you can do. And these can all change later on, but this is sort of the initial setting for this object. You can change the name. And one of the best things that I can suggest doing with programming is to name everything very clearly. It's not a big deal when you only have 2 sprites in a program, but when you start getting, I've done programs in Scratch where I have 50 sprites. And if I don't go through and name them all very clearly, it gets very confusing very quickly. So the best thing to do whenever you create a sprite, I'm just going to call this blue dog, is just to give it a name that means something to you so that you've got it. Next 2 items are about where the dog is on the screen. Anybody who's done anything with graphing, you know X and Y axes. If I just grab the dog and drag it around and move it, you will see that the numbers change. Scratch, in terms of its size of its screen, it goes from minus 240 to plus 240. So it's 480 pixels across. And it's 200, I think it's 240 pixels top to, no, 360 pixels top to bottom. So it goes, I think, from like plus 180 to minus 180 in terms of top to bottom. So that's the size you have to work with, is 480 by 360, and 0 is in the middle. So to the right is plus, to the left is minus, so on and so on. So just if you're trying to plan out where you want something to go, you just kind of know that's the size. And it doesn't matter how big you expand the screen, it will always be that size to Scratch. Scratch only thinks in that resolution. I can change the size of my dog by changing the number here. 100, this is sort of by percentage. So 100 means 100%. So this is the size that the dog was actually drawn. If I go above 100%, then the dog will get bigger. And if I go under 100%, the dog will get smaller. So if you wanted change the size of a sprite right from the start, you can just do it there. And then the final setting is direction. Every sprite points, it has a sort of a forward direction that it's considered. Straight up is 0. So the dog right now is actually pointing at 90, which is 90 degrees from the 0. So if I were to change this direction to 0, and they do give you a little picker here that you can also just click on. But if I change it to 0, then the dog is kind of looking straight up, and then anything else is anywhere in between. Now, one thing I do want to point out is that it'll go up to 180, and then past 180, it considers it to be negative. So like you went the other direction. So when the dog's pointing straight down, that's 180 degrees. But then when I go past that, it starts counting down from negative 180 until it gets back to 0 again at the top. So when you're programming and you're trying to get something to spin and face a particular way, then just keep in mind that if you put in 270, it'll turn that into negative 90, because that's just the way that Scratch thinks. Underneath this direction picker, there's 3 options here. And this has to do with the way that the sprite rotates. So the dog right now is physically actually turning. Now the dog it doesn't really maybe make sense for the dog to be looking that way, just visually. So I could have it pointing in a downward direction, but if I click on this middle option, what that means is that the sprite itself will only point to the right or the left. The direction of the sprite is still diagonal. So if I were to tell it to move forward, it will move diagonally, but the sprite itself will only face left or right. It sort of rounds it off to going left or right. So just visually, it might make more sense. For instance, if you have a human character, it probably doesn't make sense for the human character to tip, even if they're moving diagonally on the screen. So you might want to change the sprite to that left and right version. The third option you have is to just say, don't rotate it. So the sprite will always point in the direction that it was drawn, and it doesn't matter what direction the sprite's moving in, it will only point to the right. So that's just kind of a set of options that you might want to think about when you create a sprite in terms of how you want it to behave on the screen. It may not matter if the sprite never moves. If it just sits there in your program, then it probably doesn't matter what you pick. But just in case, want to make you aware of that. The final 2 boxes are show and hide. Self-explanatory. The sprite is still there. It can still react to scripts, but it's not visually available, or you can show it. So maybe in a game, if something happens, you want something to disappear, you don't erase it, you just make it invisible. And then it's still there as a sprite, but you just can't see it. All right, backdrops. I'll just point this out now before we look at the graphic editor, and then you get a chance to do some exploration. Backdrops basically behave exactly the same way. They have the exact same menu. You can upload, you can get a surprise, you can paint your own, or you can choose one. They give you a whole sort of library of backdrops that you can choose from. Ooh, that one looked nice. Some of them are actually realistic photos. Others are cartoon drawings. You can add multiple backdrops to a project and sort of choose between them. But that's basically the way backdrops work. So the only difference is that backdrops don't have a position, they don't have a size, they don't have a direction, because they just fill the screen. That's all they do. They can't move around. So that gives you a way to put a background behind everything. All right, so let me go back to my dog here. And the next thing I want to talk about quickly is costumes. So again, Scratch wanted to use just everyday, everybody can understand it language instead of technical language. So costumes is just their way of saying that each sprite can contain a whole series of different looks that you can move between. And those looks don't even have to relate to each other. One costume could be a cat and the next costume could be a llama. They are completely independent sort of images, but it's a way to give one single sprite a bunch of different looks. So for example, game-wise, you want to create a dice. Well, you would create, instead of having 6 sprites that were each the different faces of the dice, you would create one sprite that has 6 costumes, and each costume would be a different face. And each costume could be rotated a different way, so it could actually look like the dice was kind of rolling. So they are totally separate entities. They don't have to connect to each other if you don't want them to. So Blue Dog here, if I go over here and to my costumes tab that we looked at earlier, I will see that Blue Dog actually has 3 costumes. He's got sort of the basic look, another one, which is if you're going to do a walking animation, it's just sort of 2 different looks of the dog to make it look like he's walking. And then the final one, I guess he found something puzzling and he's looking at it and holding his chin. So those 3 costumes are what come with this sprite. I can edit each one totally separately. I can add new costumes. So it's the exact same picker that we had for the sprites. Only now if I go to choose a costume, it's going to show me every individual costume that's available for every sprite as a separate thing. I can draw a new costume. I can delete costumes if I'm not going to use them. So, basically a set of costumes just becomes a library of different looks for your sprite. So that brings us to the actual editor. And I said that the editor in Scratch is pretty basic. That if you're expecting to do really high-end graphics, you're not going to probably be able to achieve that in Scratch, but they're good enough. They give you enough tools that you'll be able to create just about anything. This dog was created here in Scratch, so you can make things that look like this by using the Scratch tools. So the tools themselves down the left-hand side here are probably mostly familiar. There's a picker, which lets you click on things. And you'll see as I click on different parts of the dog that this dog is actually made up of a bunch of different individual pieces. So like each eye is a separate item, the tail's a separate item, each foot is a separate item. So you can choose individual things. You can move those individual things around. Whoops, sorry about that. I took your nose away. So you can, just by selecting, you can select various things. If you drag across a bunch of things, it will select everything you've dragged across. So basically the same thing you're used to in just about any graphic editing type of environment. The next one is for reshaping. And what this lets you do is each of these pieces is made out of a shape. And that shape has a whole series of handles on them, these dots. You can actually move each of those dots individually. So if I want to make the nose a different shape, I can click on it, and then I can move each of these different handles separately. Sorry, dog. To change that shape and make it look like kind of whatever I want it to look like. I'll try to get it kind of back to where it was. So that's the difference between the sort of the picker arrow and then the shape. The next one is brush. So that's for doing freehand drawing. So wherever you click and move, you can choose a color for it. And they've got a whole color picker here. So you can change the color and so on. So that's what the brush does. The eraser does what it says. It just allows you to erase things that you've put on the screen. So if you don't like what you've done, you can change the size of the eraser, make it smaller or bigger depending on what you want to do. The paint bucket will allow you to change the color of a closed object. So you have to have a complete outline in order to use the paint bucket. But once you have a complete outline, so if I don't want blue dog, I want purple dog, I can just use the paint bucket to change the color. You can use text. It gives you a limited palette of fonts. So you have about, I don't know, 9 or 10 to choose from. And unfortunately, right now, that's it. But that allows you to then put text in. And that just becomes a part of your sprite. You can change the color again and so on. And then you have 3 basic graphics tools: a line, a circle, and a rectangle. So again, you want to add a shape in. I'm going to add a circle, draw it in there. Then if I want to change that circle, I'd go to the reshape tool. I'd grab the handles, move them around, and that lets me make other types of shapes as you go. So those are the main tools that are available. Again, it is, it's a graphics program, but it is kind of minimal in terms of what that gives you. But if you're creative, you can still pretty much create just about anything you want in this. And any changes that you make are automatically saved to that costume. So this third costume now reflects all the things that I just drew in there as I go through. The last thing I'm going to point out before I give you some time to just free explore is that under this, there's a button that says Convert to Bitmap. And really quickly, when you build graphics, there are 2 ways to build graphics. One of them is vector-based, and one of them is bitmap. Vector-based, you are basically dealing with shapes that are mathematically generated. So this is a bitmap, which is why I can say, here's a shape that is defined by each of these points. And as I move those points around, the shape is redrawn. And the nice thing about bitmap is if I were to blow this way up, it would still look just as good because it just redraws the shape at the bigger size. The other way to create drawings is bitmap. And when you bitmap, you are dealing with individual pixels. So it will turn this not into shapes that have an outline and handles, but just a series of dots of color. And I'm going to go ahead and do that here. The tools change because now I no longer have shapes that I can deal with. This is now individual pixels. And I can now go in at the pixel level and change the color of a single pixel. So with bitmap, you can get really, really detailed, but the trade-off is that you have less flexibility in terms of reshaping an object. You would literally have to go in and draw in every pixel of an outline. You can't just draw an outline. And the other thing, as you can see here, is that the quality of the image drops down. If you zoom in a bitmap image, it gets really jagged because it's just based on the dots. And all it can do is blow those dots up bigger. It doesn't know how to fill in and to smooth those dots out. So I'm pointing out the bitmap editor because it's there. And there are certain instances where it may give you some advantages. But to be honest, almost all of the work that I've done in Scratch, I've done in the vector mode. They look better, they're easier to resize and to reshape and to manipulate. So generally speaking, I would say stay in the vector mode and just kind of work from there. All right. So what we have now, and let me again just flip over and check my list. We know how to add a sprite or a backdrop from the existing library. We know how to create a scratch or sorry, a sprite or a backdrop from scratch, just by going to into the paint tool. We can set the name, the location, the size, the direction, and the visibility for a sprite. We can name the costumes, create and name costumes for a sprite. We've talked about the difference between bitmap and vector drawings. And we looked at the basic paint editor that allows us to either alter an existing costume or to create a new costume from scratch, um, or things like that. So what I would like to do now is to give us a little bit of a break, and to give you all a chance, now that I've gone through this for you and you now have the Can You list available, to give each of you a chance to hop onto Scratch and to just try these things out. Try adding a backdrop or two. Try adding a sprite or two. Try going in and editing those sprites. You can't mess anything up. If you end up getting a sprite to where it looks awful, just delete it and start all over again. So I just want to give you each of you a chance right now, while we are all here and I'm here to answer questions, to go and do a little bit of work in Scratch. Try this stuff out, and then we'll come back together if you have questions, and then I will talk about the programming side of things as sort of the second part of this evening. All right. So before I send you on your way, any questions I can answer right now? All right. So it is 5:48. I do want to keep us moving tonight, so I don't want to take too much time, but maybe, I don't know, 15 minutes. Does that sound good? To just give a chance to look at things and try things out. You know, you don't have to master everything right now, but at least to know that you kind of understand what we just went through. So let's say that we come back at, like, I guess that would put us at about 6:03-ish. And at that time, I'll again answer any questions that anybody came up with, and then we'll move on into the programming side of things. And I think what I'll do, just because of the timing, is I'll put the two programming pieces together. I'll kind of go through everything, the looks and the events, and then give you a little bit more time to just kind of explore those. And then we'll wrap the night up by just me going over what the work is for this week. So, all right, so around 6:03-ish or so, I'll see everybody back here. And like I said, just try things out, see how they work, and just go from there. All right, we'll see everybody in about 15 minutes.